Hi everyone and welcome to the next lesson in National 5 Biology. We are continuing on with Key Area 2, Transport Across the Cell Membrane, and that is of Unit 1, Cell Biology. Today we are going to be looking in more detail at the cell membrane, which is one of the organelles that we introduced in Key Area 1, Cell Structure. So the cell membrane can sometimes be known as the plasma membrane. So I want you to keep that in mind when you're doing your revision. If you're looking at particularly older past paper questions or an older, maybe standard grade textbook, you may hear it referred to as the plasma membrane. I just want to mention that so that you can connect the two dots together and you know that if you read plasma membrane, what it is talking about is the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane is selectively permeable. That means that it allows for the movement of molecules in and out of the cell depending on their size, okay? So it is selective. It only lets some through, and that is depending on the size of the molecule. And we'll get into why that is the case in a minute. Now, the cell membrane has two main parts. It is composed of proteins and phospholipids. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this is a diagram of the structure of the cell membrane. Now the first arrow up on the top left, this is pointing to phospholipids, which are these little guys here. So they have their head and then they have their two tails. Now there are two layers of phospholipids and the heads never face each other, so they actually repel each other. So there's two layers of phospholipids, the tails are always pointing at each other. In amongst your phospholipids, there are different proteins scattered about. Now these proteins can go the entire way through the cell membrane, like the two on the right hand side, or they can just sit on the surface of the cell membrane, like the one on the left hand side. The one on the left hand side is called a peripheral protein. And that is because it is on the periphery. So the periphery of your body would be like your limbs and your toes and your fingers. Okay, the things that are not part of the main core of your body, which would be like your torso. So if it's sitting on the periphery, then it's sitting on the outside. Okay, so just sitting along the outside of the cell membrane. So it is slightly embedded into the surface, but it does not go all the way through the cell membrane. On the other hand, on the right hand side of the diagram, we have integral proteins. And that is because these two are incorporated the entire way throughout the plasma membrane. So they actually act as a gateway for molecules to move through these plasma membranes. So the one in the middle here, the pink one, that is a channel protein. Okay, and that is because it has a pathway, an open pathway, all the way through it. It's a channel for the molecules to move through. And because it is an open channel and there's no resistance there, this allows for movement that is passive. That does not require any energy. And that would include diffusion. So because diffusion is passive, it doesn't require any energy, the molecules that move by diffusion are able to move through channel proteins because they meet no resistance in channel proteins. On the other hand, at the far right, we have carrier proteins. Now, there is another type of transport that we will learn about that does require energy. So diffusion is a form of passive transport. It doesn't require energy. We also have active transport, the opposite of passive being active, which means that active transport would require energy. The molecules that move by active transport, they move through these carrier proteins. And the reason that they require energy is because the carrier proteins actually sit closed on one side. So this side here is closed off, whereas this side is open. So lots of molecules could move into here, gather in here, but they're not going to be able to fit through this last part because it's currently closed. So what happens instead is energy will come along and will open this part of the carrier protein, allowing these molecules to move through. But that can only happen in the presence of energy, which we will talk about more later. So we have our cell membrane here. It is comprised of the phospholipids, which make up the majority of the cell membrane. So all of these here, they are all phospholipids, including these guys and these ones on the end. There are the two layers of phospholipids, and the tails are always together. And then we have our proteins scattered throughout the cell membrane, starting with our peripheral proteins, which just sit on the surface, our channel proteins, which facilitate diffusion, and our carrier proteins, which are used in active transport. The channel and the carrier proteins are forms of integral proteins. To summarise all of that, the cell membrane is selectively permeable. It is comprised of proteins and phospholipids. Because the cell membrane is selectively permeable, only molecules of the right size can fit through the membrane proteins. Speaking of the membrane proteins, the channel proteins allow for diffusion and osmosis, which is what we will cover in our next lesson, and the carrier proteins allow for active transport, which we will cover again at a later day. Okay guys, I hope that this lesson has helped you whether you are revising or learning for the first time, and I will see you all in the next lesson for osmosis. Take care everyone. Bye.